Hello, dear dreamers, and welcome to the Goodnight Lecture Hall. Here, ancient legends are gently brought back to life. So, find a comfortable spot, settle in, and let the gentle hum of our vintage projector wash over you. Relax, open your mind, and let's listen to what the myths have to tell us tonight. Imagine a warm Mediterranean evening. The sun has already dipped below the horizon, and the stars are slowly kindling overhead. Somewhere in the distance, you can hear the whisper of the sea. The air smells of resinous wood and fresh grapes. Thousands of years ago, it was in settings like this that people gathered to share stories. These stories were not simple fairy tales to entertain children. They were an attempt to explain the world's workings, to understand where humanity came from, why thunder roars, and why the stars shimmer so mysteriously in the night. The ancient Greeks created an astonishing world of myths, filled with gods and heroes, monsters and trials. But most importantly, their mythology became a language through which people spoke about eternal themes, fears and hopes, justice and revenge, love and jealousy, strength and weakness. This is why Greek myths have survived the centuries and reached us. They continue to resonate because they speak not of someone else's, but of our human nature. Each myth is like a mirror in which humanity sees its own reflection again and again. Before we embark on our journey through these stories, let's look at those who populated the imagination of the ancients. The pantheon of Greek gods is vast, but among them are key figures who cannot go unmentioned. At the summit stands Zeus, sovereign of the sky and thunder, king of the gods, whose word decided the fates of both mortals and immortals. His lightning bolts inspired terror, yet they also brought order to chaos. Beside him is his wife, Hera, patron of marriage and family, a stern and jealous guardian of lawful order. The underworld belonged to Hades, a stern but just ruler of the realm of the dead. He was not evil, but his name was rarely spoken aloud, for the very thought of death sent a shiver through people. His shadow was always present in the lives of the Greeks, a reminder nothing is eternal, not even heroes. But the pantheon was not limited to somber rulers. Athena, the goddess of wisdom and just war, embodied reason and strategy. She was born not from a mother's womb, but from the head of Zeus, as the embodiment of thought and intellect. Her shield and spear were not just weapons, but symbols of knowledge and truth. Apollo, the radiant god of light, music, and prophecy, inspired poets and healed sickness. His image united beauty and harmony. His sister Artemis guarded the forests and hunters, was a companion of the moon and a protector of young maidens, forever free and independent. Aphrodite, born from the sea foam, reminded all that love and beauty could captivate even the immortals. There was also Hermes, the messenger of the gods, patron of travelers and cunning tricksters. He wore winged sandals and could find a path where no one else saw a way. He deceived, brokered deals, delivered messages, and guided souls to the underworld. And of course there was Dionysus, the god of wine, festivity, and inspiration, whose name was associated with ecstasy and madness, with destruction and creation. His cult spoke to the human desire to transcend the ordinary, to touch something boundless. Greek myths were never just a collection of invented tales. They were an entire universe, reflecting the experience of a people living among mountains and seas, accustomed to storms and earthquakes, to wars and festivals. Myths explained thunderstorms and volcanoes, the changing seasons, and mysterious dreams. Through stories of the gods, people understood that nature could be both generous and merciless. They learned to respect its forces and seek harmony with them. Myths were also a tool for education. A child was told about Prometheus or Heracles, not for mere amusement, but so they would understand. The world is full of trials, and everyone must find the courage within to overcome them. These stories taught respect for elders, bravery, keeping one's word, and caution in the face of the unknown. By listening to a myth, a person internalized rules for living that could not be written into law. It's important to remember that myths were not frozen legends, recorded once and for all. They were living stories, retold around campfires, and in temples, in songs and tragedies. Every storyteller added their own touch, which is why dozens of versions of the same myth have reached us. But herein lies their strength. They did not dictate a single truth, but left room for reflection, for the search for meaning. Hearing a myth, a person could ponder how to live, whom to fear, whom to trust, and what to consider important. Myths were deeply connected to art and festivals. Every city-state had its own sacred rituals and festivals dedicated to the gods. Athens honored Athena Polias with grand processions. Sparta appealed to Artemis for success in war, and islanders made sacrifices to Poseidon, for their lives depended on the sea. Hymns echoed in the temples, while poets and playwrights transformed myths into tragedies and comedies. Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides, each of them retold the ancient stories in their own way, adding new shades of meaning. But myths lived not only on stage and in temples. They were part of everyday life. A person setting out on a journey might ask for Hermes' protection. Sailor prayed to Poseidon. A farmer scanned the sky, hoping for the favor of Zeus and Demeter. Even the simplest acts were woven with the belief that the gods were near. This proximity made the world feel full of wonders, and every event significant and rich with symbols. For us, people of the 21st century, myths might seem like a distant antiquity. But if we listen closely, we realize they echo the very same questions we ask ourselves. What is justice? Is it possible to challenge authority? Where does love come from? And why is it so powerful? Why is the world full of suffering? And is there reason to hope for better? These questions have not vanished. They live within us, just as they lived within the ancient Hellenes. And perhaps that is precisely why, when we listen to myths, we feel not only interest, but also a sense of recognition, as if hearing our own thoughts spoken in another's voice. It is in this very spirit that we will recall the ancient stories, not as a collection of old texts, but as a living fabric where the fates of gods and humans intertwine. We will see how the world is born from chaos and how the struggle for power begins among the primordial forces. We will follow how Prometheus gave humanity fire and hope, and with them, suffering. We will learn why evil entered the world alongside good, and why hope was the last to remain. And finally, we will witness the deeds of heroes who, despite their mortality, managed to defy fate and leave their mark on human memory. So, let us begin this journey. Ancient Greece awaits us, with its gods, mysteries, and legends that still stir the human heart. In the beginning, there was chaos. But the word chaos for the ancient Greeks did not mean disorder in the modern sense. It meant the abyss, a gaping void from which nothing had yet emerged. It was a state before any form, before light and darkness, before earth and sky. Time did not exist, nor did boundaries. There was only the potential for a world, like a breath not yet formed into a word. From this chasm, the first entities gradually arose. Not humans, not even gods, but forces that would define the future pattern of existence. Gaia appeared, the earth, broad and heavy, as reliable as a mother's palm. Tartarus emerged, the depth beneath depths, a place where even thought rarely reaches. Alongside them, Nyxta, the night, and Erebus, the darkness. Then Ether, the luminous heights, and Hemera, the day. And suddenly, Eros, the primeval force of attraction that binds the fragmented and compels forms to appear. Thus, the void gave way to a world where everything sought its measure and name, and movement strove to reunite what had only just learned to be separate. Gaia did not wish to remain a lonely plane. From herself, she gave birth to Uranus, the sky, a boundless vault that lay over her like a blanket. They united, and the world felt rhythm for the first time. Day followed night, and the wind caressed the mountain ridges. The union of Gaia and Uranus bore fruit. The Titans were born, mighty and majestic. Among them, Oceanus, who flows around the edge of the world, Hyperion, who carries the radiance of celestial bodies, Atlas, the future upholder of the vault, and the Titanesses, Themis and Rhea. But a special place in this lineage was held by Cronus, cunning, cautious, patient. His name would later be linked with time, and not by chance. It was as if he understood from birth that power is not given forever. Uranus, despite his grandeur, lacked gentleness. He feared his own offspring. He saw in his children a threat to his dominion. And so, as soon as another Titan or Titaness came into the world, Uranus forced them back into the depths of Gaia, imprisoning them within her. The earth groaned, crushed beneath the weight of her own children. Then Gaia raised her eyes to the sky and called for help from those trapped within her body. She forged a sickle from hard stone, a cold, simple tool, and asked, "Who dares?" Many remained silent. One answered, Cronus. The night was moonless when Uranus once again descended to earth. From an ambush, Cronus stepped forth, raised the sickle, and tore apart the chains of his father's power. With a cry, sparks of celestial fire scattered, and a new era began. From the blood spilled upon the earth, the Erinyes were born, the dark goddesses of vengeance, and the fearsome giants. And from the foam raised by the sea, beautiful Aphrodite, a reminder that even from pain, the power of attraction is born. This is how the Greeks explained why suffering and beauty coexist in the world. Order is always born through rupture. Cronus became the ruler. By his side was his sister and wife, Rhea, the great mother of future gods. They had children, but Cronus's heart knew no peace. A prophecy, like a slow cold, lived in his chest. You will be overthrown by your son, just as you overthrew your father. And Cronus, fearing his fate, began to swallow each newborn whole. Into his womb disappeared Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, 5 whose names would long echo powerfully in the myths. Rhea wept, filling the world with a sense of helpless bitterness. But she could not stop her husband. Cronus feared as much as he ruled. When the time came for the 6th child, Rhea resorted to cunning. She took refuge in Crete, in a cave between the scent of thyme and the salt of the sea, and gave birth to a boy. He would be called Zeus. In place of the infant, she wrapped a heavy stone in swaddling clothes and gave it to Cronus, and he did not notice the substitution. The real son, Rhea, hid away. He was nursed by nymphs, and his milk came from the goat Amalthea. The sound of his infant cries was drowned out by the Curetes, warriors who clashed their spears against their shields, so the world would not hear the one growing up who would change it. Zeus grew quickly, like a storm gathering strength over a warm sea. He learned to read tracks on the earth and signs in the sky, grew accustomed to the silence of the mountains and the wind's sharp laughter. Amalthea became the scent of his childhood, and her horn a promise of life's abundance and generosity. But in the heart of the future, Sovereign lived not contentment, but a duty. He remembered his brothers and sisters, swallowed by their father's dark will. And when the time came, Zeus, without a cry, but with clear resolve, descended into Cronus' world. He was aided by Metis, wisdom personified, who became his counsel. She prepared a potion that weakened Cronus, and from his throat, one by one, emerged Rhea's children, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, alive, radiant, as if newly born again. Thus an alliance was formed, the likes of which the world had never seen. The children of Gaia and Uranus, who had endured darkness, united with the one who had been hidden on the island of storms. And the great war began. The Titanomachy, the very stones, grew hot. For 10 years, the world lived to the rhythm of blows. Cronus had gathered the Titans, and their steps sent tremors through the earth. In mountain ravines, landslides broke loose. In the valleys, fields cracked. The Olympians were younger, but they possessed what their elders lacked: unity and faith. Zeus raised his eyes to Tartarus and called upon those imprisoned there, the Cyclopes, one-eyed smiths of thunder, and the Hecaton Kairos, the 100-handed ones, whose very names sounded like the rumble of an avalanche. The Cyclopes forged lightning bolts for Zeus, a trident for Poseidon, and a helmet of invisibility for Hades. The Hecaton Kairos lifted mountains onto their shoulders and hurled them like pebbles into a river. The battles were like storms. Poseidon struck with his trident, and the waters rose like a wall. Hades vanished under the shadow of his helmet, appearing where the enemy least expected a strike. Hera and Demeter brought order and fertility, fighting not with rage, but with endurance. On the side of the Olympians were the fields, the wind, and the silent logic of nature itself. The Titans hurled boulders. Atlas held up the sky to keep it from collapsing. Cronus closed the ring, striving to sever the path of time itself. But each day of the war worked against him. The longer the battle raged, the more evident became the strength of the young gods' alliance. A volcano smoked among the mountains, and in its heart, the hammers of the Cyclopes roared. There the lightning bolts were born, bolts that Zeus held in his hand like a whip and a measure, not merely destruction, but the right to judge. When he hurled them, the sky flashed, and for a moment, the world saw itself as in a mirror. Trees bent by the wind, frightened animals, humans looking up at the sky for the first time, all became witnesses to the battle upon which their future fate depended. For the ancients, these tales were not just songs. They explained thunder, volcanic fire, and the trembling of the earth as plainly as we explain the laws of physics. The decisive clash unfolded at the very gates of Tartarus. There, where the stone was blacker than night and the air thick as oil, Zeus stood firm and summoned all his allies. The Hecatonchires lifted 100 stones each and rained them down like hail. The Cyclopes threw sparks into the sky that fell as showers of fire. Poseidon stirred the seas so violently that even the edge of the world, where Oceanus dwells, shuddered. Hades, invisible, robbed the Titans of their footing. Their steps sank into emptiness. Zeus raised his lightning bolts, and in one motion he channeled all the years of war. Light split the darkness, and Cronus fell, not from a single blow, but from the unraveling of his own fears, which he had failed to master. The story of the Titanomachy is not just a cosmogony, but a mirror of human life. We know what it is like to struggle against the weight of the past, against habit and fear, how difficult it is to reach agreement, and how easy to sever bonds. We understand the value of allies and the value of one's word. Therefore, when an ancient listener heard about the lightning bolts of Zeus and the stones of the Hecatonchires, they nodded not because they believed every detail, but because they recognized in it their own experience. Thus, myths transformed the cold forces of nature into a warm language of meaning. There is another facet to the new order: oaths. The gods, like humans, had to acknowledge the power of a law that does not depend on whims. The most sacred was an oath sworn by the Styx, the river that flows at the boundaries of the underworld. Its waters are as bitter as the memory of broken promises. He who lies, invoking the Styx as his witness, loses his voice and strength for long years, and his glory fades. Thus, the myth spoke of the price of a word. The world stands on agreement, and agreement is held together by fidelity. The landscape that emerges from these stories is recognizable. Mountain ridges where an exiled boy could easily hide. Olive groves where leaves rustle as if sewn from silver. Narrow coves where the sea runs like the breath of Poseidon. The stone here remembers the steps of the Curetes and the clang of their shields. Dark caves preserve the coolness, and it seems one can still hear the breath of the goat Amalthea within them. The wind carries the scent of thyme and resin. The night smells of salt and stars. The dawns of milk and bread. These details are not accidental. A myth is always tied to the land on which it is told, otherwise it quickly fades. In the shadow of Olympus, a new silence has appeared, the silence after the storm. It is not empty. Within it, future names are ripening. Mnemosyne, memory, will give birth to the Muses. They will grant humanity songs and stories, so that experience does not vanish, but transforms into history. Hephaestus will take up his forge, and the fire that forged the lightning will begin to serve craftsmanship. Hermes will run the roads of the world, reconciling trade and cunning. Dionysus will show how festivity can restore life when it runs dry. An entire generation of gods will take their places, and yet each of them will become a metaphor that helps humanity understand itself. But no matter what happens on Olympus, the question of humanity does not disappear. If the world is divided and ordered, if laws now rule, if a word holds the world in balance, then upon whom will the labor fall? Who will lift the first stone and light the first fire? The ancients answered, humanity would not appear by chance. They were destined to be not merely subjects of the gods, but the guardians of the world created in the storm. And therefore, the next story is about how a single act of defiance brought fire and knowledge to the earth, and what price was exacted for it. Remember the sounds of this chapter: the ring of the sickle, the sound of the sea by the cave on Crete, the deep rumble of stones falling from the hands of the 100-handed ones. Remember the gestures: how Zeus raises the lightning bolt, how Poseidon touches the water with his trident, how Hades lowers his helmet, and the world grows quieter for a moment. Remember the taste: salty, like the sweat of those who held the line for 10 years, and bitter, like the waters of the Styx. These sensations are not mere decoration, they are the meaning. Myth speaks through the body, and that is why it outlives books. And so, order is affirmed. The sky is transparent, the sea breathes, the subterranean gloom preserves the shades. Olympus is not high, but the meaning anchored upon it is. And we can move forward now, toward the figure who binds gods and men, who will extend to us a warm flame in the night. His name is Prometheus. With him begins the story of humanity, of how difficult it is to earn the right to hope, and how easily it can be lost if one forgets the price of a word and the measure of strength. Thus concludes the chapter on the birth of the world and the victory of Zeus, an overture to an order where the sky, the sea, and the subterranean gloom gained their guardians, and the earth a chance to receive its first people. Ahead lie stories of gift and punishment, of hope and its price, of how, beside the gods, the voice of humanity begins to sound. And when this voice first utters a word, it will be as warm as fire and as cautious as a hand reaching toward the light. Order was established. The lightning bolts were sorted into palms. The sea was subdued by the trident, and the subterranean gloom had accepted its measure. But where the thunder fades, a new question inevitably arises. The world is divided among the gods, but where is the place for those who will walk the earth, plow it, look at the sky, and try to understand what the signs of the clouds and stars mean? The ancient Greeks answered this question with a name that sounds like a promise of foresight: Prometheus, the one who thinks ahead. They said of him that he was a Titan, the son of Iapetus, brother of the reckless Epimetheus, he who thinks after. In these names lie two paths of fate. One sees the consequences beforehand, the other understands too late. Prometheus belonged to the elder kindred of the cosmos, but his heart was drawn to those who did not yet exist, to the future humans. He was not tempted by power over the elements. He was occupied with the craft of fate, how to make experience out of helplessness and fire out of darkness. First, the figure, Prometheus, bent over by the riverbank, where silt is mixed with water and ash, shapes living forms with his palms. The clay is soft as an early morning. His fingers leave grooves in it. He takes a speck of dust, adds a breath to it, and in this mixture, the seed is born of what would later be called a human. The myth does not argue with anatomy. It paints meaning. We were molded from the earth of this world so that we remember we are a part of it, and to it we shall one day return. On the white bark of the plane trees, the figures dry, familiar and imperfect. Their eye sockets are still empty, but their knees already know how to bend, and their backs how to straighten up towards the light. But one thing is the form, another is the movement. Life does not ignite on its own. A heat is needed to wake the blood, to make the heart beat, and the thought to glow. Prometheus seeks not strength, but a spark. He walks the earth, listening to the rumble of the depths, the breath of volcanoes, the electric whisper of the thunderstorm. He knows the sky has fire, but the sky also has an owner. After the division of the world, fire is in the hands of Zeus, and access to it is barred by the high door of Olympus. Prometheus tries a different path, the path of cunning, knowledge, and ritual. At the assembly in Mycone, he teaches the gods and humans the sacrifice. He divides an ox into two parts, hiding the meat under the hide and covering the bones with shiny white fat. The gods choose the gleam. The useful part remains for the humans. This is not a deception for its own sake, but a lesson. Not every wrapper is equal to its content. But Zeus senses a challenge. Insulted by the choice, he hides fire from the people. Let them freeze through the nights. Let their hands remain wooden. Let their tongue find no words for song. If the hearth has no heat, then Prometheus decides to do what no one had done before. He ascends to where the thin air of the sky weaves the slopes of Olympus, and hiding a smoldering ember in a hollow, dry stalk, in a tough ferrule, he carries it down from the heights. This is not a flaming torch, not a burning bonfire. It is a tiny spark that must be sheltered from the wind with a palm. He brings it to the clay figures, to their empty eye sockets and future fingers, and brings it close. The spark touches the air, and inside the figures, a breath begins to stir. The clay grows warm, the skin darkens, and in the pupils, the reflection of the flame ignites. The human takes its first breath, and with its first movement, stretches its hands toward the warmth. Fire is not only warmth, it is the ability to see further. With fire, the kitchen and the forge are born, the home and the workshop, the word and the law. A circle of light appears around the fire. That's where stories live. Beyond the circle, shadows, where dangers await. Fire dries clay and turns it into pottery, softens metal and transforms it into a knife, a needle, a plowshare. It gives the night a form. Beside it, one can share bread and silence, argument, and laughter. This is how the myth explains the leap that anthropologists would call culture. It is not the gods who descend to humans, but humans, having received the spark, who climb towards the gods through work, memory, and craft. But the divine order does not tolerate unauthorized changes. Zeus sees the smoldering trail in the sky and understands that something has changed without his permission. The paths of the winds tell him of fire in the lowlands, of the smell of roasted meat, of a song that did not exist before. Zeus's wrath is not merely an outburst of pride, it is fear for the world structure. If someone can change a rule without the consent of power, then the rules themselves are in question. Thus, justice enters into a dispute with mercy, law, with compassion. Punishment follows swiftly. Prometheus is captured and led to where the world touches its edge, to the Caucasus, to rocks as sharp as bare bone. There he is chained with chains forged by Hephaestus, not out of malice, but out of duty to his craft. The iron is cold, but the cold quickly gives way to heat. Each day, an eagle flies to him and pecks at his liver, and by night, it grows back again. This punishment is devised not for death, but for remembrance, so that every new sunset brings pain as the price for the gift. By evening, the iron grew hot from his body, and the snow beneath the cliff smelled of blood and rust. Yet, the myths do not depict Prometheus as broken. He does not beg, does not ask for mercy. His gaze is on the future. He knows that by giving people fire, he gave them the means to reach even him. Fire is a test of maturity. Will humans turn it into war and ash, or into bread and craftsmanship? In this ambiguity lies the whole human lot. And Prometheus chooses the risk, because he believes thought is worth the pain, and freedom is worth the fear. Meanwhile, the people, still weak, are learning. The first night with fire is trembling and laughter. They think the darkness has a face, that the shadows are alive. They throw branches into the fire and watch as the sparks, like stars, fly away into the darkness. They understand. Warmth can be preserved in the ashes and fanned back to life in the morning. They listen to stories together. This is how speech is born, which holds experience in sounds. Where the fire burns, circles appear. Family, neighborhood, city. Crafts emerge. The potter, the blacksmith, the carpenter, the shepherd. The clay rustled with warm dust on their palms. The metal yielded like dough, and the workshop smelled of a wet spark. This is how hands learn to remember what the flame teaches. But the story is not exhausted by Prometheus's punishment. Zeus is not just a punishing hand, he is the guardian of balance. The violated order demands not only pain for the guilty, but also a lesson for those for whom the gift was intended. And this lesson Zeus planned to carry out through Prometheus's brother, Epimetheus. He who thought afterward was gentle and trusting. He loved all living things, distributed qualities to the beasts, and did not devote as much attention to protection as was needed. It was easy for him to be pleased by a gift, especially if it shone. But before this gift, another stroke to Prometheus's character. Chained to the rock, he does not remain silent. He knows a secret that could change the future history of Zeus himself. The secret of a marriage and a birth. The secret of a name that could become a threat. In some tales, he whispers it only to the wind. In others, he promises to reveal it to whoever will break his chains. Here the myth lays bare an idea. Knowledge is also fire, and it is no less dangerous than flame. That is why a riddle always stands beside the forge, and a prophecy beside the hammer. The rock is not eternal. One day in the future, a hero will pass by, whose fame lies in his strength and his compassion. He will draw his bowstring, and the eagle will fall into the abyss. The chains will not fall immediately. Part of them will remain on his arm as a reminder that a gift is never free. But we have yet to journey to that meeting, and the path to it lies through stories about people, about what they did with the fire. The flame changed the night, but it also changed the day. With the appearance of a fire, waking hours increased, conversations lengthened, memory of deeds emerged. People learned to bake clay and store grain, evaporate salt and heal with herbs, alter metal and draw boundaries. In the place of campfires, hearths appeared, then houses, then cities. By the fire, duties were distributed. The voice of the elder became law, and later the word solidified on a tablet. And every time a person made a mark on clay, they repeated Prometheus's gesture, uniting earth and thought. Of course, along with craftsmanship came danger. Fire does not choose whom to serve. It warms and burns, cooks food and consumes the forest. It illuminates the face of a friend and shows the way to an enemy. With fire came war. Metal turned into a sword, the home into a fortress, and the word guard became commonplace. But this too is part of the lesson. A gift is always dual. The ability to foresee consequences, a Promethean quality, became a rare virtue. More often, people repeated Epimetheus's path and understood later than they should have. Zeus, observing how people managed the fire, did not look away. He needed to be sure, would this new heat tear the fabric of the world? And although his anger at Prometheus had not cooled, the tales convey a respect for the Titan's endurance. He withstood the punishment and did not retreat from his faith in humanity. Such duality is in the spirit of Greek thought, which knew how to see light and shadow in a single face. Meanwhile, on Olympus, a gift of a different kind was being prepared. If fire is skill, then the next gift is a test of the heart. It will shine and smile, smell of flowers and fresh wood. It will say yes where one ought to think. It will become a trial that will pass through every home. But before we speak its name, let us finish the story of Prometheus as the one who placed burning meaning into the hands of humans. There is a particular justice in this myth. Prometheus did not create humans as omnipotent, nor did he make them infallible. He gave them the possibility of becoming and the responsibility for choice. It is as if he said, "You are not divine, but you are capable of the divine, if you hold to measure." That is why around the fires, not only songs were born, but also rules. To share bread while it lasts, to share fire when someone is freezing, not to throw a spark into the dry grass of war. Thus, culture became a fence, not just a celebration. At night, when the wind bends the wandering flames and sparks fly into the sky, it seems a thread is stretched between the stars and the campfire, from Olympus to the earth. Along this thread travels the story, passing from the old to the young. The elders tell the children how once a titan stole a spark and hid it in a reed so that people would no longer fear the dark. The children listen and reach their palms toward the heat, not only to warm themselves, but to understand that in warmth there is duty. They grow up and teach their own. And so memory continues, which is stronger than rocks and chains. Once, even before the shackles, Prometheus engaged in a work that could be called the first education. He taught people to look and to connect. He showed how the shadow moves across the ground and how one can measure time by it, how the stars rise from behind the mountains and how one can find their way home by them. He connected sign and thing, sound and meaning. From this connection, letters and numbers were born. He taught them to see function and form, the circle for the wheel, the angle for the house, the furrow for the field. In this Promethean teaching, there is nothing miraculous, but there is the miracle of an attentive gaze. It reveals possibility in the everyday. And yet, Prometheus's lesson was not only about things, but also about dignity. He explained to people that strength lies not in punishment, but in responsibility. That wisdom is not in knowing all the answers, but in the ability to ask precise questions. That freedom is not the right to do anything, but the art of choosing in such a way that the world becomes more stable. And that is why, in the oldest stories, where the clang of hammers and the eagle's cries are heard, there sounds a strange, almost quiet feeling. For the first time, humans understand what it means to be human. At the end of this path stands the same question with which we began. Where is the place for humans? The answer is already visible in the outlined circle of light. Their place is between the fire and the shadow, between knowledge and risk, between law and compassion. In this narrow interval, human destiny is born. Prometheus gave us not so much fire, but a mirror in which we see ourselves as responsible. For this he paid, so that we might try to pay less. The cliff continues to hold his silhouette. When an eagle rises in the mountains, it seems the world is returning again to that day when humans received their first gift. But somewhere a bowstring is already being drawn, and the arrow is guided not only by the hero's hand, it is guided by gratitude. That will be a story for the future. For now, a warm silence around the fire, on which stew is cooking, a clay jar is drying, and the embers rustle as if whispering the ancient name with which human culture began. And yet, the myth would not be Greek if it left the question unanswered. Is it possible to grant fire to those who do not yet know how to foresee? It is, if you give measure along with the gift. The next story is about measure, called by a name that charms the ear. Some will say it is a gift, others will recognize it as a test. And when the lid of its vessel stirs from curiosity, the world will understand that hope is also a fire, only a quieter one. But before that lid, one more breath. We will leave Prometheus at his cliff and the people at their hearths and move on to the story of Pandora. Fire already lived among people. It crackled in hearths, dried clay, forged iron, and illuminated long conversations where rules were born. But every spark changes the pattern of the world, and the order established on Olympus felt this. Zeus, the keeper of measure, did not turn away from the earth. He needed to remind both humans and titans that a gift without measure is a trial. Thus began a story where beauty became honey, and the lesson, a sting. Her name is Pandora, the all-endowed. The earth did not grow her as it grew the mountains. She was created in the workshop of Hephaestus, where the walls breathe heat and the hammers beat a measured rhythm. From moist clay arose the figure of a maiden. The clay is pliable, and the hand of the god knows where to emphasize the line of a shoulder, where to outline the curve of a neck, where to leave a slight asymmetry in the smile so the face appears alive. Athena brought the breath of thought to this body. Pandora's eyes became clear, like the morning air. Aphrodite placed upon her skin a glimmer of love, not just beauty, but desire. The Charites clothed her in the light of laughter, and Peto, the gift of persuasion, a softness of voice and grace of movement. Hermes gave her speech, light and dangerous, like a shining knife. One can cut bread, or one can cut trust. From each of the powers, Pandora received a particle, not a granite finality, but a living mixture where merits are inseparable from risks. The name Pandora sounded like a promise of gifts, and in this lay the irony of the myth. The all-endowed, meaning attractive to everyone, but also carrying within herself everything, both joy and misfortune. Zeus looked not at the beauty, but beyond. Through beauty, he intended to return to the world the memory of boundaries. He knew that Prometheus's brother, the trusting Epimetheus, would not resist the gift. He also remembered the previous trick with the division of the sacrifice, where gleam had defeated substance. Now the gleam was taking on a human form. When Pandora was led to the house of Epimetheus, the earth breathed with the heat of noon, and the air was so transparent that it seemed gods and men walked the same path. On the threshold, She was greeted as one greets good fortune, with joy and without questions. Prometheus had once warned his brother, do not accept gifts from Zeus. But a warning, like any word about the future, pales next to the radiance of the present. Epimetheus smiled, and the house filled with a new light. In this house, where the walls still smelled of raw clay, stood a vessel, not a light casket, but a heavy pythos, a storage jar for grain and oil, tall, with a wide belly, strengthened by clay ribs. The lid lay tightly, and the rope tied around it was strained by the knot. What was inside? An unanswered question next to a marvel is not a trifle, it is a magnet. Pandora walked around it, touched the ribs of the vessel with her fingers, like a musician seeking a rhythm on a drum, and listened to how the clay resonated hollowly in the silence. No one told her, do not touch. They only said, let it stand. Sometimes that is the strongest invitation to action. The days flowed like water. Pandora learned to pour wine so that it became conversation, to toast bread so that it crackled with a crust. She laughed, and her laughter became a new fire for the house. For the first time, people saw that a home could be beautiful, not only through utility, that a word could caress and a gesture could adorn, but along with this lightness grew the whisper of the question, what if I lift the lid just for a moment? Curiosity is not a vice in the myth, but an engine. It lives in the same place as the thirst for knowledge. Sometimes they go together, sometimes apart. In the morning, when the sun still clung to the grass with bright drops, Pandora stopped by the vessel. In the narrow gap between let it stand and what if, a spark was already shimmering. She touched the rope. The knot gave way. The lid shifted slightly and sighed heavily, as if it itself were a tired guardian. And then, as if from afar, came a rustle, similar to the flight of bees, only there was no sweetness in it. From the mouth of the vessel, as from a narrow gorge, rushed forth what had long been waiting its turn. The first to escape was cold, not winter air, but the emptiness in one's chest when words and bread suddenly run out. Next was sickness. It did not scream, it merely touched so that bones ached. Grief intertwined with anger. It was hot and blind like a spark in dry grass. Envy scratched the wall shrilly. It always loved sound, and falsehood slipped out softly, like a cat, and immediately hid in the shadows. After them crawled deceit and want, anxiety and despair, gossip and pride, uncertainty and fear. The vessel became the throat of a storm, and from it flew out the words with which people would later name their most difficult days. Pandora recoiled, but it was too late. She slammed the lid with both hands, and the rope hissed taut. Silence, heavy, settled on her shoulders. Something else remained inside, quiet, almost weightless, that which did not have time to fly out. In the myth, it is called Elpis, hope. What does this mean? Was it kept back for people as a last but faithful support? Or conversely, locked away from people so that they would never receive frivolous consolation? The Greeks left this question open, and that is precisely why the myth lives. It allows us each time to choose what to consider hope, a spark that you cherish, or a mirror in which you see yourself stronger than yesterday. One can see in this a story about female guilt, and later tales sometimes did so. But the ancient text is broader. Pandora is not the cause of misfortunes, but their form, not evil, but a mirror. She brings into the home a beauty to which the world always responds simultaneously, with both love and anxiety. Through her, the myth shows the price of curiosity and the price of knowledge, the price of a gift and the price of boundaries. We see not so much a culprit as an occasion through which the forces already hidden within the vessel manifest. And if Prometheus's fire is knowledge, then Pandora is the experience of how to use it without destruction. From that day, the world became different. The road ceased to be always gentle. Fatigue settled in its stones. Any work began to require effort, and sweat acquired the taste of salt. Sickness settled in the body, and the word tomorrow learned to sound like a question. But together with the sorrows, people discovered a strange bond. They began to hold on to each other more tightly. Customs of support appeared, the sharing of bread in lean years, signs of grief and vows of help. The calamities that escaped from the vessel taught people to build walls and to build relationships. They created space for law and for compassion, the two hands without which a home cannot stand. What, then, is hope, which remained inside? If it is the lot of the gods, why should people live? But the myth is not about despair. Hope remains in the house, like a quietly smoldering ember. It cannot be taken outside and distributed like fire. It lives in the closed, the domestic, the heartfelt. It is not an empty faith that everything will work itself out. It is the ability, in the darkness, to hold one's hand over the ashes and feel there is still warmth. It can be fanned. Hope is a skill, not a spell. It reminds us, even when troubles around are louder than songs, one can kindle something small, and without promising oneself miracles, take the next step. Thus, in one myth, two fires unite: the Promethean, obvious, burning, and the Pandoran, hidden, domestic. The first teaches one to act, the second, not to lower one's hand when action has exhausted its strength. One requires audacity, the other, patience. Their union makes a person not a god, but resilient. And in this sense, Pandora is not a refutation of Prometheus, but the second half of his lesson. Zeus, looking at the changed world, did not triumph nor revoke the sentence. He achieved what he wanted. People ceased to be children, to whom everything comes without effort. Henceforth, every loaf of bread would be linked with sweat, every joy with the risk of loss, every word with the possibility of being misunderstood. But it is precisely in this complexity that the design of culture is born. Law as an attempt to protect the weak, art as an attempt to speak the truth, celebration as an attempt to return warmth to the community. The calamities that flew out of the vessel did not destroy humanity. They spurred it to build and to negotiate. With time, Pandora ceased to be only a figure of trial. She became a wife, a mistress of the household, one who knows how to preserve and distribute. In her hands are the keys to the home, in her gaze, a sensitivity to change. The myth does not turn her into a statue with guilt in her hands. It gives her a story. People learned to see that beauty is not only a danger, but also labor. To adorn does not mean to mask. It means to carefully give form its best content. Pandora taught the home to see itself. Every vessel has a lid, every word has its measure. This is seen especially clearly in rituals. When a child was born in the house, the lid of the vessel was opened to release fragrances, not calamities, but the scent of herbs, rosemary, myrtle, olive oil. Thus, sense took precedence over the memory of the first opening, and Pandora acquired a new meaning. To open does not always mean to release evil, sometimes to release the aroma of life. And yet, everyone who tied the rope on the lid felt the ancient lesson in their fingers. Boundaries are no less important than generosity. In the stories of the elders by the hearth, Pandora and Prometheus conversed between the lines. "You gave us the spark," people seem to say to Prometheus, "and you gave us the habit of guarding it," they responded to Pandora. In these two remarks lies the most important thing about the human way of life. Not only to have, but also to protect. Not only to receive, but also to retain. The home became a place where fire and hope live side by side. One is visible, the other is not, and yet both are equally real. Sometimes the myth is told more briefly. She opened it, and evil came out. Hope remained. But the short formula does not allow one to hear the main thing, the silence. After the slam of the lid, comes a moment when the house, like an animal, listens to itself. Is it intact? Is the coal still smoldering? Can we speak? And if we can, where to begin? It is here that what will distinguish people from gods and beasts is born. The ability, after stress, to study the consequences, to learn from them, to change behavior. Pandora is an early lesson in resilience. And this myth is also about the perspective on a gift. A gift is not only that which is pleasant, it is that which demands responsibility. Fire is not a toy. The vessel is not a riddle. The home is not an empty stage for random beauty. To be endowed does not mean to be freed from measure. It means to be intently seen by fate. Pandora, the all-endowed, is a sign that everything will be tested. Beauty, by labor, the word, by silence, curiosity, by self-control. And in this testing, maturity is born. When evening descends upon the field and the air smells of straw, people gather again by the fire. Some troubles still sit in the shadows. Envy awaits a convenient moment. Fatigue begs to settle on shoulders. But nearby, in the very heart of the home, a different heat smolders, the one that remained in the vessel. It is not visible, yet it allows one to rise in the morning and go again into the field, to return to the workbench, to cook soup again, to say hello to a neighbor again. This small, stubborn again is hope, not as a promise of miracles, but as the ability to return to the task. Thus, Pandora completes the design of this part of the story. Prometheus gave skills to kindle, to mold, to forge, to compose. Pandora gave contours to preserve, to limit, to choose, to close in time. Together, they made from consequences the beginning of something new, from calamities, a reason for solidarity, from doubts, a reason for conversation, from loss, a reason for memory. And that is why their names always stand together, even if the tales are told on different evenings. And next, a different tone of story will come. A world where fire and hope live awaits a figure who would draw a line of action through it so that deeds return into the sequence of concepts. That will be the story of a hero, not flawless, but strong, about those journeys and labors where a person tests their limits. He will be called by different names, but we will choose one who has 12 difficult labors and a long path, Heracles. We will tell of how the tasks of the whole world fell upon the shoulders of one, and how his strikes and mistakes reflected the fate of all of us. Before this road, let us linger for a moment by the vessel. The lid is in place. The rope is tightly tied. In the corner, a quiet heat. In the air, a soft scent of oil and herbs. In this silence, one can hear the myth taking a deep breath. It is about to change its meter, quicken its step, and transition from philosophical light to movement. But it will not forget the lesson. At the foundation of every feat lies a hearth, and it must be protected no less than monsters must be slain. There is one more detail that the storytellers like to recall. For the Greeks, the vessel was not a casket, as is often said later, but a large domestic belly, a pythos, heavy, almost immovable. It is not opened on a whim, it is opened by decision. Thus, the myth seems to say, calamities emerge not from a trifling toy, but from utilitarian necessity. We are constantly opening and closing something in order to live. And therefore, Pandora's curiosity is not a caprice, but human destiny, to check what is behind the lid, even knowing there might be pain. And the heavier the lid, the more mature the one who decides to lift it. They know in advance that after opening, they will have to close it and live with the consequences. After fire and hope, the world became closer to humans. But a story needs not only thought, it needs a step. The very sound of a sandal on dust, the strike of a spear on a shield, the breath before a throw. Where Prometheus gave skill and Pandora gave measure, a figure appears who must pass through many obstacles to test both. Its name sounds heavy and simple, Heracles. His birth was already a conflict. In Thebes lived Alcmene, wise and gentle, and Amphitryon, a husband who knew the value of duty. On the night when fate decided to call a hero into the world, Zeus descended to earth and took the form of Amphitryon. The morning brought two breaths into the house, one from a man, the other from a god. From this double light, a boy was born. Hera did not forget and did not forgive. The jealousy of the sky's consort is not a flash, but a long shadow. It would walk beside Heracles his entire path. From infancy, he was tested. Into his cradle, they say, crawled two huge serpents. The child did not cry. He seized them with his small hands and squeezed their throats, as one takes hold of reins. The house understood. In these shoulders dwelled a strength that disliked unnecessary words. The years passed. Upon his shoulders rested a bow and arrows. On his palms, calluses from the bowstring and spear shaft. On his back, the smell of horse sweat and leather. He studied with a musician, but once, unable to restrain an outburst, he broke the lyre. He studied with a tutor, but his true teacher came later. Life itself, with its simple but heavy lessons, where every mistake costs more than a book, where an ordinary destiny would have had room for marriage and quiet glory. Hera twisted the knot. A heavy madness fell upon the house of Heracles, and the dawn after it became unbearably clear. In this clarity, there was no place for self-satisfaction. He came to the Delphic oracle and heard the sentence that would define him for years to come: to serve King Eurystheus and perform 12 labors, not for glory, but for atonement and order. Thus began the labors, not as a game of the gods, but as work for which one is not paid in gold, but paid with the right to look people in the eyes again. The first, the Nemean lion. How many proud beasts there are in the myths, but this one was not just a beast. Its hide could not be pierced by iron. Arrows bounced off it like from a stone wall. Heracles entered the forest's shadow, which smelled of warm resin and old honey, and followed the damp tracks, as if following the traces of rain. In the narrow cave, where breath turned to steam, he cast aside his bow, removed his sword, and stepped forward with empty hands to meet the growl. There was no beauty in the struggle. There was crunching and heaviness. There was stubbornness. He seized the beast in a hold, pressed it to the ground, felt the lion's breath tearing, and how its strength grew heavy in his hands. When it was all over, the forest became too quiet for a moment. Heracles skinned it, using the lion's own claws, threw the hide over his shoulders, and from then on, this heavy cloak was his armor and his memory. The second, the Lernean Hydra, the serpent of the swamps and mists, 9-headed, for whom death meant the multiplication of pain, cut off one head, 2 grow back. Heracles understood. Brute force is useless here. What's needed is skill and fire. He called his nephew Iolaus, not because he was tired, but because a feat is rarely a solitary act. The 2 of them entered the smoke, one with a blade, the other with fire. Each time the sword severed a head, Iolaus pressed a burning torch to the stump so a new one could not grow. The heads hissed, the swamp boiled, mosquitoes fell into the hot mud, and the smell of burning mixed with the swamp's dampness. In the end, the Hydra fell still. Heracles dipped his arrowheads in its venom and made his weapon more dangerous. But poison is always a debt. One day, it returns to its master. The third, the Cyrenean hind, fast as a thought, with golden horns, dedicated to Artemis. It could not be killed. It had to be caught and taken, without wounding. For weeks, Heracles followed the light imprint of its hooves, without breaking the forest's silence, and when his hand touched the warm neck, he understood. Sometimes a feat is the ability not to destroy. He showed the hind to Artemis, accepted her anger and her explanation, and released the quarry. In this was a lesson. Strength becomes honor when it knows how to stop. The fourth, the Erymanthian boar, a mountain avalanche on 4 legs. The snow crunched underfoot. The air cut the throat like a blade. Heracles chased the beast across the slopes until its breath was steam right before his eyes. Then he lunged, like a shadow of the wind, and toppled it into a snowdrift, so that it became stuck, heavy, but alive. A feat is not always death. Sometimes it is the ability to stop and bind. Eurystheus, upon seeing the boar, hid in a large storage jar, and the entire court laughed for a long time. But this laughter was a way to forget that order often rests on the shoulders of one person. The fifth, the Augean stables, not a feat against a predator, but the work of a carpenter and an engineer. The stench was so strong, it made words hoarse. Heracles leaned on his shovel and understood. A sword is useless here. He diverted the channels of 2 rivers, Alpheus and Peneus, and sent the water through the yard. Where dirt had accumulated for years, the currents roared, washing away the accumulated grievances, and the air began to live again. The feat turned into a simple truth. Sometimes to defeat chaos, one must not strike, but redirect. The sixth, the Stymphalian birds, with iron feathers, cutting the air with their wings. Heracles went to the lake shore. There in the reeds was such a cacophony, it made ears tremble. Athena gave him rattles, bronze, resonant. He shook them, and the birds rushed into the sky like a dark cloud. Then the bow spoke. Arrows found their targets, one after another, and the iron fell into the water, clinking against snags. Sometimes the gods need not hand down lightning. It is enough to give a tool, so that the human can do the rest himself. The seventh, the Cretan bull, fierce as a winter wave. Heracles grabbed its horns, and his shoulders hummed like taut ropes. He squeezed, rolled through the dust, pinned the bull with his knees, and released it where he was ordered. In this task, there was no blood. There was a mastery over fury. The eighth, the mares of Diomedes, which fed on human flesh. Their eyes were murky with malice, their bits bloody. Heracles turned their muzzles toward the grass, the water, quiet pasture, and held them for a long time until the trembling ceased. Evil is sometimes a habit. It is cured not by the sword, but by changing the path. The wrath of Diomedes fell upon himself, and for the first time in a long while, the herd calmly lowered their heads to graze. The ninth, the belt of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons, whose generosity turned into misfortune. Hippolyta had already removed the belt, respecting the feat, but rumors and shouts did their work. The warriors ran with weapons, and the sword had to be raised not against an enemy, but against an enraged crowd. This is how heroes learn that sometimes evil is not one person, but the noise that obscures meaning. The tenth, the herds of Geryon, the thrice red shepherd. The path lay through lands where the sun hangs lower than usual, and the wind smells of salt and iron. Dogs barked from three sides, hooves beat the earth like drums. Heracles led the herds away, fending off the shepherds and birds, and on the return journey set up stones so that travelers would remember where the edge of the world lies. The 11th, the golden apples of the Hesperides. Where the sky becomes thicker than water, stands a garden, guarded by Ladon, the serpent guardian, and the daughters of night. Heracles did not break down the gates. He spoke with Atlas, the very one who holds up the celestial vault, so it does not fall to the earth. "Hold this," said Atlas, "and I will bring them." Heracles set his shoulders, and upon him lay, not just weight, the world with all its stars settled. His spine spoke with fire, his knees with water, but he stood. Atlas returned with the apples and tried to leave. Then Heracles smiled and asked, "Hold it just a moment longer. I need to adjust the padding on my shoulders." Atlas lifted the vault, and Heracles, now with free hands, took the apples and left, returning the weight to the one accustomed to bearing it. The 12th, Cerberus, the three-headed dog, guardian of the boundary. Zeus permitted it, but on one condition, without weapons. Heracles descended into Hades, where silence tolerates no footsteps, where the air is thick as water. The shades did not look at him. Charon was silent at his boat. Persephone and Hades heard his request. Heracles bowed. Order is maintained by respect. Cerberus growled with three voices at once, one like the wind, the second like stone, the third like iron. The hero closed his hands around the beast's neck, firmly, but not cruelly. When Cerberus submitted, the earth seemed lighter for a moment, and the shades seemed to retreat. Between these labors were journeys where Heracles did what rarely makes it onto shields. He built bridges across small rivers, drove bandits from the roads, adjusted harnesses, repaired wells. Where the gods spoke with lightning, he spoke with a shovel and rope. Labors are the peaks, but between the peaks lie paths, and it is there that a hero becomes needed. There is a feat that binds the celestial and the earthly. On the road, Heracles encountered a silhouette on a cliff, tall as a dry tree, immovable as law. An eagle flew to him, its beak black with blood. Heracles raised his bow. The arrow sang in the air and vanished. The eagle fell like a stone. The chains rang. Some remained, some broke. For the first time in a long while, Prometheus looked upon the world without the shadow of a wing. In this lies the bridge from the Titanomachy to human labor. Gods were defeated by gods, but chains are removed by humans. The glory of Heracles was heavy and not loud. He did not give long speeches. His speech was a restored path, a clean riverbed, a rescued traveler, a warm hide on the shoulders of a boy who was cold. He erred. The Hydra's poison, absorbed into his arrows, would one day turn against him. Jealousy and cunning would weave a garment that would begin to burn on his skin. He would ascend the pyre, not as one defeated, but as one who has completed the path. The fire with which our story began would accept him, and in the fire, he would become something else, as if a weary human body had shed a heavy shirt and become lighter. Some said he ascended to Olympus, where Hebe was given to him as a wife, and his labor became an eternal festival of strength. Others, that he remained in the memory of people, and that was enough. In the cities through which he passed, small but important traces remained. Wells cleansed of rot, footbridges across streams, dispersed gangs, quiet celebrations after hard work. In this lies the truth about the hero. He is not only a vanquisher of monsters, he is a master of order. His blows are the blows of a carpenter driving a wedge, the blows of a farmer against a stone. His silence afterward is a sign that the task is done. Thus, the story comes full circle. Prometheus gave the spark, Pandora gave the measure, Heracles gave the action. Together, they explain why myths are not museum plaques, but living instructions. How to fight fear, how to find allies, how to divert a river if a shovel is powerless. Heracles reminds us, a feat is not about being super, but about going to the end, to reach, to think through, to finish. A feat is seen not by the enemy's cry, but by the silence after, when water flows where it should, the beast sleeps where it must, and the person returns home. Before the conclusion, our story holds its breath. In the silence, the outline of all we have passed is visible. The stars above the Nemean cave, the mist over the Lernaean swamp, the icy whiteness of the mountains, the bull's roar, the dust of the stables, the clang of iron feathers, the crimson sunset of distant lands, the golden gleam of the apples, and the gray-green twilight of the underworld. All this is not a scattering of pictures, but a road that can be retold to a son or a daughter, so they know. Strength without measure is destruction. Measure without strength is powerlessness. And together, they give that very foundation on which one can stand, even when it is dark all around. But every path has its price. At one of the river crossings, Heracles struck the centaur Nessus with an arrow, for the centaur had assaulted the honor of his home. Dying, the cunning centaur left Deianira, the hero's wife, with his deceitful advice, "Take my blood, and it will restore love, if ever you should lose it." The blood contained the Hydra's poison. Years later, when jealousy darkened Deianira's sight, she sent Heracles a beautiful garment soaked in that blood. The cloth clung to his skin and ignited with pain, not with flame, but with corrosive agony. Heracles understood this was not a battle that could be won by strength. He ascended Mount Ota and ordered a pyre to be built. His friends hesitated, but a passer-by, who feared neither fire nor pity, lit the flames. Some say it was Philoctetes. Some say it was someone nameless in the myth that matters less. What matters is this: the fire with which our story began accepted the hero and delivered him to new worlds. From that time on, in some tales, Heracles ascends to Olympus, sheds his mortal pain, and receives Hebe, youth, as his wife. He remains close to people, not because he became a god, but because his labor was human to the very end. And yet, on Earth, by the fire, his hide, his club, and his paths remained. Others used them. In them, one felt a simple thought. A feat is not just a one-time event. It is every day. To carry water, to carry a word, to carry responsibility. Sometimes to divert a river, sometimes to hold back a blow, sometimes simply to open the gate for a neighbor returning late. A hero is great not because he is unlike everyone else, but because he shows how all of us can be a little better. Thus concludes the path of Heracles, not as a list of wonders, but as an instruction in courage and measure. And if somewhere at night it seems to you that a heavy lion's skin rustles nearby, it is merely the shadow of one who once decided that strength must serve. With this thought, we will enter the conclusion, where we look back on the entire journey, from chaos to the human home with its fire and quiet hope, and ask ourselves, what is all this for us today? When the story falls silent, warmth remains, like from a hearth where we've spent the evening. The flame sometimes threw sparks, sometimes quieted down, and with it, our journey breathed, from the gaping maw of chaos to the clear sky of Zeus, from Prometheus's defiant spark to the quiet heat of hope, from the heavy labors of Heracles to the simple silence after work. Greek myths do not close off the world, they open it. They push back the shadows so that the most important thing enters the circle of light, the human, who looks into the fire and sees their own reflection. Why have these ancient stories survived the centuries? Because they are not only about gods, they are about us, spoken in allegory. In Zeus, one hears the voice of law and responsibility. In Poseidon, the memory of the impermanence of all living things. In Hades, the reminder of measure and end, without which life loses its taste. Athena teaches one to think and act justly. Apollo gathers into a single ray music, light, and healing. Artemis leaves in the soul an island of freedom. Aphrodite reminds us that without attraction, no order holds. Even the quarrels of the Olympians sound like human clashes of character, magnified to celestial size so they are easier to discern. But the pantheon is merely the backdrop against which three paths we have walked are seen more clearly. The first is about order. The birth of the world for the Greeks is not an instantaneous miracle, but a long work where the old resists the new, where every gift has its guardian, where every step aside is a risk. Zeus's victory over Cronus, the division of the world, the oaths sworn on the Styx, all this is about how harmony rests not on the strength of lightning, but on the agreement of forces. For the sky not to collapse, someone must hold it up. For a word not to be devalued, it must be kept. The second line is about the gift and its price. Prometheus molds us from earth so that we remember our origin. He brings fire so that we change, not remain static. He accepts punishment so that we do not forget the cost. For the Greeks, fire is not magic, but skill, pottery, metal, bread, speech, law. When we place a pot in the kiln, Take a knife in hand, draw a furrow, tell a child a story. We repeat the Promethean gesture, and each time we choose where to direct the spark, to the home or to the conflagration, to craft or to war. The third is about measure, whose name is Pandora. Her vessel is not a toy, but a domestic pythos. It is opened not by whim, but by decision. Along with the calamities that made us more attentive to one another, a quietly smoldering ember remained in the world. Hope, not a loud faith in miracles, but the habit of returning to the task after failure, the skill of fanning heat from the ashes. For the Greeks, hope is not the song of victors, but the craft of the resilient, to keep the lid closed where necessary, and to lift it where it is time. And finally, the line of action. Heracles returns step and the weight of shoulders to the myth. His 12 labors are not a parade of wonders, but a textbook of action. The lion teaches courage without bravado, the hydra, alliance and technique, the hind, restraint, the boar, persistence, the stables, engineering thought, the birds, the precise tool, the bull, mastery over fury, the mares, the re-education of habit, the belt, the danger of rumor, the herds, the patience of the long road, the apples, the ability to trust and not give oneself entirely, Cerberus, respect for the boundary. Behind the famous episodes remains the main thing. A hero is not one who always wins, but one who sees the task through to the end, and after defeats, returns to the work. If you combine these lines into a single drawing, you get an important formula. The world is ordered, but fragile. A gift is great, but dual. The path is open, but requires a shoulder. Myths offer not a set of answers, but a language in which to articulate difficult things. When we argue about rules, we repeat the Titanomachy, learning to maintain a balance between force and right. When we search for how to teach without breaking, we remember Prometheus, who gives the spark and immediately warns of the price. When we choose between curiosity and caution, Pandora stands before us with her vessel. When action is required, a voice whispers in a heroically simple way, "Do it like Heracles, not loudly, but to the end." These stories have another quality. They return physicality to meaning. In them, one smells resin, and a wet spark hears the clang of iron and the rustle of clay. This is important for the adult listener, tired of abstractions. The myth tells us meaning is in the palm of the hand, in the furrow, in the warm breath before a word. To think is not to detach from the earth. To think is to connect earth and thought, as in that ancient gesture when the first sign appears on a damp tablet. Of course, it's easy for us to say, that was back then. But the experience of myth is not a museum. It works every time the world develops a crack. When the old departs, and it's unclear what will replace it. When new abilities appear before new rules. When weakness neighbors audacity. The Greeks left us not a recipe, but a habit of conversation, to look at the flame together and decide how to live on. And every time we choose measure over shouting, alliance over solitude, work over posturing, the myth comes alive in the present tense. Perhaps that is why their stories sound like a kind but demanding voice. They do not promise an easy path. They do not pat us on the head. They remind us of the price and of dignity, of responsibility for one's word, that freedom is labor, not a gift. And yet, they leave room for joy, for song by the hearth, for dance after a hard day, for gazing at the stars, which still seem close if you look long enough. We end the journey where we began, by the fire. Its circle of light grows smaller, but the embers are still warm. May the conversation continue in this warmth. May each person hear in the myths what is theirs. One will find courage in them, another, patience, a third, attentiveness. And if it suddenly becomes dark, remember, a spark hides in the reed, hope in the household vessel, and strength in the hands that know how to work. And then even the longest path will prove passable, not because the gods will smile, but because the human will preserve the measure and walk to the end. Thus ends this evening's tale, not with a full stop, but with a comma. Tomorrow, perhaps, we will tell more about other heroes, about other paths. But even today, we have what is most important, a warm hearth, the memory of the gift's price, and the simple thought that the world's order rests on our attentiveness to the small things. Where the ember glows, the world is still held, and that is enough to take the next step